Okay, bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Actually, I'm doing this recording because there are only one more page left here, one or two pages. No, actually there are about three pages macam tu, 2 or 3 pages. So let's just finish this off. We actually covered the part on responding. Okay, when it comes to responding, you remember Tara. When you remember Tara, then you remember that this is a response to the risk based on our assessment of the risk in terms of its likelihood or frequency as well as its impact lah, kan? And this is just another way of looking at your risk, right? You can see here, it says the risk management process helps organizations to prioritize. This is actually an important word. So you may want to use this word as well. In the risk register, for example, you don't only have the risk assessment of the risk, what response should we do, who is in charge. You also have something called prioritization of the risk. Kan? And this has to do with risk attitude juga, risk appetite kan. Given what risk do you take and which risk do you allocate more resources on. Ini priority kan. So because you cannot do everything, you can only focus on some things and perhaps you have to ignore some less important things. So prioritizing, you have to highlight that. Although you can eliminate, kan dia katakan. Usually gross risk without any mitigation, and residual risk that remain once management action has been taken to address them, are compared to assess how effective such a risk response action has been. Okay. This is about, when you have risk and you do some action, so ada before and after kan. So what you have before any action is called gross risk, and after there's some actions taken, you call it residual risk kan. So as the name suggests, I think you can get that. These are just some important or interesting terms that you can make yourself familiar with macam tu And then dia kata these two risks are compared to assess how effective such risk response action has been. So when you look at when you make comparison between residual risk and gross risk kan, this is actually a way to evaluate whether your risk response is effective or not. Boleh tak guys? Macam tu And taking the example of all exploration above, we discussed about this. Clearly, the gross risks are significant, and without the ability to deploy suitable controls, okay, this is again in chapter 8 nanti, such as protective clothing, and inilah saya sebut ni safety equipment tu, heavy machinery and training, such activity will be avoided. However, once these steps have been taken, the residual risk is low enough to be considered acceptable. Clearly, the risk appetite of such an organization would come into play here as well. Okay. So in other words, this is the summary. We learn by using Tara, how do we respond to risk? But remember, when we talk about how we respond to risk, we can talk about the response before any mitigation is done. Faham tak guys? Sebelum buat apa-apa. In and of itself, death in oil rig due to, let's say, explosion kan, a platform explosion ke apa, in of itself bahaya mungkin kan, and then likely kan, but that is before anything is done. That is called gross risk, betul tak guys? So this is like perencah, this is like a more detailed discussion on Tara. What is your response to the risk? But when you talk about what's your response to the risk, you have to also consider whether the risk that you are talking about is gross risk or residual risk. So the answer that I give to you, when we can consider somehow accepting the risk or not avoiding, but we reduce the risk, that is referring to residual risk, meaning after some mitigations, after some controls are being done. Nampak tak? So that's why kalau dalam contoh ni kan, gross risk, maybe you say we avoid this, but due to or after risk response is there, then it becomes residual risk. In this case, your response has changed. it now becomes acceptable. Contoh, so this is a continuation from Tara lah. Okay. Next, this is we have something called assurance mapping. The word assurance macam audit kan. Assurance mapping. Let me read this and then I just summarize it. A mechanism for linking assurances from various sources to the risk that threaten the achievement of an organization's outcomes and objectives. They can be at various levels dependent upon the scope of the mapping. So it's just mapping again, but in this case, you are not mapping the likelihood and impact of the risk. Rather, you are mapping the assurance tu. So keyword dia kat sini lah, 4 lines of defense. If you imagine like a castle kan, istana that you want to protect, dia kan ada banyak line kan, ada banyak pagar lah, pagar paling luar, pagar paling dalam, and paling dalam yang the innermost must be the strongest kan. So just look at here. You just have to understand this to show you that you have different assurance level, betul tak? First and foremost kan, when it comes to risk, apa yang confirm kena ada atau yang you have to put in place, first line of defense. Kalau yang ni pun tak ada, bye-bye lah dekat tempat lain, betul tak? This is within the company itself. This is again going to be discussed in detail in chapter 8. Okay, so you have first line of defense, management controls, internal control within the company. Okay, but in addition to this, you need a second line of defense. In other words, if this doesn't work, at least you have like a backup, because this is actually at different level, a different line, kan? And this is the financial control, security, risk management, quality inspection and compliance. And if you notice, this is still within the company. Okay. The third one is, again, still within the company, but you know that they are separate. Betul tak? Internal audit ni, to maintain its independence, it has to be separate from management. Okay, tapi the third line of defense. And lastly, can you see the layer guys, the layer. You also want to, let's say, what do you call it? Assure lah kan? Assure the company when it comes to managing the risk by having fourth line of defense, which is external audit. Okay, all of these I think are already something that you are familiar with lah. Okay, should not be a problem there. Wait, let me clear drawing. Okay, excellent. Habis kat situ. And this is the last one before we go to the monitor kan. Okay. Allowed means as low as reasonably practicable. Okay, you highlight this word. It's actually a pragmatic approach to managing risk. And let me summarize for you. When you want to manage risk, you want to reduce it, you want to transfer it, and whatever lah kan. Macam kalau transfer ni contohnya insurance kan. You are sharing or transferring the risk to insurance atau cover company kan. Meaning if the risk materialize, maknanya there is any harm, waliyahzubillah, anything bad that happens to us or an organization, someone else will be paying, betul tak? But before that happens, you must be paying the monthly contribution, betul tak? Kalau takaful lah. Kalau insurance dipanggil, you have to pay the monthly premium. In other words, in order for you to manage risk, there will be some cost to it. So a LAP ni is simply telling you that if managing risk is, if the cost of managing risk is too much compared to the benefit, then you don't do it. Nampak tak kan? Ini dia panggil pragmatic. Kan? Contoh, let's say there is someone who is a tutor yang dia kata dia boleh bagi you guarantee that you will pass SBL. Maknanya memang very likely you akan pass. Okay, so dia akan charge you 3,000. Contoh lah ni kan, 3,000. So ini I don't want you to do this, tapi contoh katakanlah seolah-olah nak katanya baik, you have to repeat in that case dengan let's say the cost is 1,500 kan. At least repeat tu bayar 1,500 kan. Berbanding dengan kalau tak nak repeat tapi kena bayar 3,000 kan, lagi banyak. Dia macam tak worth it kan. Although you can argue from other point of view lah, dari segi mungkin not only 1,500 tapi ada juga masa, sedih dan sebagainya kan. But I think you get my point. Kalau cost dia nak pass tu adalah 3,000 contoh, benefit dia adalah hanya you save duit 1,500, dia tak berbaloi. So that's what allowed means. In other words, the only thing that, I mean, you can read the rest of this. I want to make this very simple to you. This is a summary kan. You take two things here. Allowed means that you are considering cost benefit analysis tau. You are doing a cost benefit analysis. You are trying to evaluate and compare between the cost and benefit. That's why it is called a pragmatic approach, which means only if the benefit of managing the risk is higher than the cost of managing the risk, then only you will proceed with that risk management. Okay, or to put it in a different way, if the cost of managing that risk is higher than the benefit of managing that risk, then you don't do it. You don't manage that risk. Or you may even avoid that risk in the first place lah kan. But that's what allowed means. And lastly, this is another way of managing risk. You diversify it. And we have come across this, and I've also shared with you a video kan, on correlation, causality, and regression. You may want to consider listening to that or watching that, and habis, then monitor lah. This is simply telling you that once you identify, assess, and respond to it, you cannot let go. You have to continuously monitor. Not only monitor whether, let's say, the response, the action is working or not, is effective or not, but also you have to monitor sometimes, let's say, the risk that you have assessed to be of low impact at one time, it could change to become something that is more impactful in other time kan, due to many different factors. Contoh kan, I mean like contoh lah, kalau awal-awal you ambil SCCA, you are sponsored by MARA, they allow you untuk fail once. Contoh kan, so at that point, failing has some impact lah, tak best lah sebab you kena repeat kan. Tapi at least MARA bagi you chance, betul tak? Tapi later, katakanlah dah fail sekali, in the following sitting, kalau fail lagi, kena terminate sponsorship tu, kena bayar semua. Contoh kan, so nampak tak impact dia dah berubah. So in other words, monitoring ni emphasizes that number one, it's another step after responding. Number one. Number two, it shows that this is a continuous process. We came across that word kan, I think iteration kan, iteration. So it continues, it is ongoing. That's why you have the last part, which is to start all over. Okay, so now that's why it says here, the cycle has come full circle kan. Dia macam kalau kita solat tu rakaat lah kan, daripada berdiri, rokok, kita dah semua sujud yang kedua, and then you bangun balik, dah cukup satu rakaat. But you have another rakaat kan, so that's one full circle. This is very important because you can use this as a point in the exam. When you talk about risk management, actually you can make one sentence in your answer to talking about how risk management is a continuous process. So it has to start from A to B to C to D, and it will go to A again. Kalau you sebut that kind of statement or sentence in the exam, especially when you talk about risk management, you should get a mark there because it's a very important thing in risk management. I hope that's very clear. This marks the end of the chapter lah. This should be good. We will continue with chapter 8 pula nanti. Wallahu a'lam. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you everyone, and sorry for any shortcomings. Yeah.